Imagine a night before history had a name. The desert stretches endlessly, cold under the weight of a million stars. The wind moves in slow whispers, carrying sand across the earth like the turning of an ancient hourglass. And in the heart of this darkness, there is a fire. Not just any fire, but a flame that has burned without end for generations. The people gather around it, their faces glowing in the golden light, their shadows dancing on the temple walls. Some see it as a god, others as the breath of a god. And among them, a boy stands, no more than 7 years old, his eyes fixed on the flame, as if it were speaking to him. Long before Zoroaster's name was etched into the memory of civilizations, Persia was a land divided. This was not the empire you may picture from later history, not the grandeur of kings and marble palaces. No. This was an age when Persia was a patchwork of tribes, each with its own gods, its own rights, and its own fears. Life was ruled by omens. The flight of a bird at dawn could decide whether a village went to war. The shadow cast by a flame could determine whether a child was blessed or cursed. People prayed. But their prayers were bargains, not devotions. Spare my family, and I will give you this offering. Protect my cattle, and I will burn this incense. The gods were many, and they were unpredictable. Every river, every tree, every mountain was said to have its own spirit, and each demanded something in return. But among these spirits were also darker forces, unseen beings blamed for sickness, drought, and misfortune. In the night, storytellers spoke of two great powers. One that gave life, and one that took it away. But to most, this was just a tale, not a truth to be lived. Violence was as common as the sunrise. Tribes raided one another for food, for cattle, for revenge. Blood stained the earth as often as rain blessed it. In this world, a young man named Zoroaster grew. He saw the endless cycle, fear leading to offerings, offerings leading to more fear. He saw priests growing wealthy on rituals while the people remained in ignorance. He saw warriors dying for causes they barely understood. And deep inside him, a question burned: is this truly the way the world was meant to be? He began to wonder. Speaking to elders, to priests, to travelers from distant lands. Everywhere he went, he heard the same stories in different words: the battle between light and dark, order and chaos. But he also noticed something else: the light was always spoken of as distant. The dark, as close. It was in the hearts of men, not just in the shadows of the night. And so, the seed planted in that boy by the fire began to grow into a flame, one that would not let him rest. One that would lead him to the banks of a river, where the world as he knew it would vanish in a single moment of pure, blinding truth. It was early morning when Zoroaster reached the river. Mist clung to the water like a silver veil. The air was still, holding that strange silence that comes just before the first bird sings. He had come to fetch water for the temple rites, a duty he had performed countless times. But today, the world felt different. As if it was holding its breath. He knelt by the bank, cupping the cool water in his hands. And in that moment, without warning, time seemed to dissolve. The river stilled. The air thickened, glowing faintly, as though the line of dawn had been drawn closer. And then, he saw him. A figure of impossible clarity. Neither old nor young. Neither entirely human nor entirely divine. The being's eyes were deep pools of calm, and in them, Zoroaster saw not just his own reflection, but the reflection of the entire world. Without moving his lips, the figure spoke, not in sound, but in meaning: I am Vohumana, the good mind. Rise, Zoroaster, for you have been chosen to walk with the truth. And before Zoroaster could speak, the world around him shifted again. The river, the trees, the very earth dissolved into light. And he stood in a vast expanse where there was no horizon. In the center was a radiance too pure to look at directly, yet it did not blind him. From this light, a voice emerged, warm and endless: I am Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord. I am the source of all that is good, all that is true, all that is eternal. Zoroaster felt his heart open as if a door had been flung wide inside him. The voice continued: the world has fallen into the hands of falsehood and chaos. Men serve shadows and call them gods. But there are only two forces, the force of truth and the force of the light. And you, Zoroaster, must be my voice among them. He was shown vision of humanity's path when it chose truth, fields blooming, laughter returning to the streets, light spilling into every corner of life. And then, the path of the lie, endless war, fire consuming villages, the light fading until nothing remained but ash. Zoroaster trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what he had been shown. The light spoke one final time: remember this: good thoughts, good words, good deeds, In these three lies the path to me. Choose them, and teach others to choose them also. And then, like waking from the deepest dream, Zoroaster found himself kneeling by the river again, the cool water still in his hands. But now, the morning was alive with birdsong, and the mist was lifting. The world was the same, and yet, for him, it would never be the same again. Zoroaster walked away from the river. But the voice of the wise lord echoed in his mind with every step. The words were simple: good thoughts, good words, good deeds. And yet, he knew they carried the weight of eternity. In the days that followed, he began to see the world differently. Every action, every decision, every spoken word, seemed to align with one of two currents. One flowed toward harmony, the other toward destruction. And now he understood what Ahura Mazda had shown him, the two forces. They were not mere stories told by old priests to frighten children. They were not myths bound to the fireside. They were the very currents of existence. The first force was Asha, truth, light, order, the rhythm by which the universe is kept whole. It was the fire in the hearth, the honesty in a man's voice, the promise kept even when no one is watching. The second force was Druj, the lie, the shadow, the slow unraveling of harmony. It was the whispered deceit, the greed that poisons generosity, the violence born from pride. Zoroaster realized something few dared to say: the gods his people worshipped were not all aligned with truth. Some fed on fear, demanded blood, thrived in chaos, and yet, people bowed to them because they were afraid to do otherwise. He began to teach, quietly at first, that these two forces were not only in the heavens, but within every man and woman. That each day, each choice, was an offering to one or the other. It was not an easy message to give. It demanded responsibility. It stripped away the comfort of blaming fate, or the gods, for our actions. It said, you are not a pawn in this battle. You are a participant. And so, he taught, the human mind is a flame, small, but able to burn brightly if fed by truth. Let it feed on lies, and it will smoke, choke, and go dark. This was the flame of consciousness, the awareness that every choice is a match struck, every intention a spark sent into the world. And when enough sparks are lit with truth, they join together, until the darkness has nowhere left to hide. But the reverse is also true: enough lies, enough shadows, can smother even the brightest flame. This was not a myth to Zoroaster. It was the law beneath all laws. And he knew, if people could see the two forces clearly, they would never again serve the darkness willingly. But there was danger in this truth, because the darkness does not surrender without a fight. In Zoroaster's world, fire had always been a part of ritual life. Every tribe had its hearth, every temple its flame. But to most, it was simply a tool, a force to cook with, to warm the body, to light the night. Zoroaster saw something deeper. He had been shown, in his vision, that fire was more than an element. It was the most perfect mirror of truth. It consumes without discrimination, yet gives light and warmth to all who stand near. It cannot be touched without respect. It burns away the impure, leaving only what is pure enough to endure. To him, fire was the closest thing in the physical world to the light of Asha, the divine order. When he spoke of Ahura Mazda, he often spoke beside a flame. Not because the flame was the god, but because it was a living reminder of the god's presence. The people listened differently when the fire burned. Its crackle was like the heartbeat of the earth, steady and alive. Its glow reflected in their eyes, as though each listener carried a piece of it within. And perhaps, they did. He began to teach that every soul was a flame. That our choices, good thoughts, good words, good deeds, were the wood that kept it burning. Neglect it, and the fire would fade. Feed it with lies and cruelty, and the smoke would choke it until no light remained. In the temples that followed, the fire was never allowed to die. Priests tended it day and night, carrying coals in bronze vessels if it needed to be moved. Travelers would stop to warm themselves, not only for heat, but for the blessing of standing in its light. And for Zoroaster, that was the point. That every time someone looked into the flame, they would remember the truth that it symbolized. Light is alive, truth is alive, and both must be tended. It was here, by the fire, that many of his followers first understood the heart of his message. Not through long speeches or sacred texts, but in the simple act of standing in the light and feeling, deep inside, that it belonged to them too. But fire does not only warm, it can also burn. And for those who thrived in darkness, the fire of truth was a dangerous thing. At first, the fire drew curiosity. Strangers would linger at its edge, listening to Zoroaster speak of truth and the two forces. Some would nod quietly, as though a forgotten memory had been stirred. But others, left with eyes narrowed, the old priesthood watched from the shadows. For generations, They had held the people in their grip through fear, fear of many gods, fear of curses, fear of endless rituals that only they could perform. It was a fear that filled their temples with offerings, and their own pockets with power. Zoroaster's words were a spark in dry grass. He told the people that there was only one true divine source, Ahura Mazda, and that the endless sacrifices to lesser gods and spirits were in vain. He said that truth could not be bought with bribes to the heavens. He said that every man and woman could walk with the light without the priesthood as gatekeepers. To the common people, this was liberation. To the priests, it was treason. Rumors began to spread. They whispered that Zoroaster had been touched by a deceiving spirit, that his fire was cursed, that those who followed him would anger the gods and bring famine to the land. And soon, it was not only the priests. Chieftains, who relied on the chaos of many rival faiths to keep their tribes divided, began to see him as a threat. His teachings united people under a single truth, and unity made them harder to control. One evening, as the sun fell behind the desert hills, Zoroaster returned to the temple to find the sacred fire nearly smothered, its coals scattered, its light reduced to smoke. It was no accident. That night, he was warned by a friend. They mean to silence you. Leave now, before it's too late. But Zoroaster did not run. He understood something that darkness never does, that truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. If the fire went out in the temple, he would light it again in the hearts of the people. And so he stayed, and the opposition grew bolder. Whispers became open threats. Threats became stones thrown in the night, yet the flame, the real flame, the one within him, only burned brighter, because Zoroaster knew. This was not just a clash of men, it was the two forces themselves, meeting face to face in the world of flesh and blood. The years of resistance weighed heavily on Zoroaster, but they did not break him. He wandered from village to village, speaking by small fires, in markets, even in open fields. Many turned away. Some listened in silence. A few stayed to hear more. And then came the summons. A messenger from the royal court arrived one morning, riding a horse draped in silk. He bore the seal of King Vishtaspa, ruler of a great realm where war and trade intertwined, and where whispers of Zoroaster's teachings had already begun to reach the palace. The king was curious, not convinced, but curious. When Zoroaster entered the royal hall, it was not as a priest seeking favor, it was as a man carrying the weight of a vision too great to be ignored. The court was filled with nobles, generals, and priests in elaborate robes. They watched him like a hawk watches a mouse, expecting weakness, waiting for a misstep. The king's voice was deep and commanding. You speak of one god and two forces. You speak against the gods of my fathers. Tell me why I should not see you as a threat to my throne. Zoroaster met his gaze without bowing his head. Because, Majesty, a throne built on lies will crumble in shadow, but a throne built on truth will stand in the light forever. A murmur spread through the court, some in outrage, others in awe at his boldness, and then, Zoroaster spoke of the two forces in a way that pierced even a king's guarded heart. He spoke of kings who ruled with justice, and how their names outlived their reigns. He spoke of rulers who embraced the light, and how their empires turned to dust. Your Majesty, he said softly, I do not seek to take your power, I seek to make it eternal. The hall fell silent. And in that silence, something shifted. The king leaned back in his seat and studied the man before him. At last, he said, if your words are true, your God will prove them. You will remain in my court and teach, and we will see if your light can stand the test of time. It was not yet victory, but it was the first crack in the wall. And from that day, Zoroaster walked the marble halls of power, tending not a temple flame, but the far more fragile fire of belief in the heart of a king. Life in the royal court was a world away from the dust and wind of the villages. Silken banners swayed from the columns, jeweled goblets caught the candlelight, and whispers moved through the air like invisible threads. But Zoroaster knew, no matter the setting, the two forces were always present. They walked the palace halls as surely as they haunted the poorest huts. In the council chambers, he saw the same patterns he had seen in the streets. Asha, the truth, shining in acts of loyalty, fairness, and compassion. Truj, the lie, curling in the shadows of greed, ambition, and hidden betrayal. One evening, while the court debated matters of war and alliance, Zoroaster stood quietly, waiting to speak. The king noticed his silence. You have counsel for us, prophet? Zoroaster stepped forward. Majesty, every battle you fight in the world is only the echo of a greater battle within. The courtiers shifted uncomfortably, unused to hearing such words in a place of strategy and power. He continued, the lie begins as a whisper inside a man. It tells him he must have more, take more, hold more. It tells him that the cost does not matter. And soon, He finds himself at war, not with enemies across the border, but with his own soul. The truth begins just as quietly. It urges him to act with honor, even when no one is watching. It leads him to speak words that cost him, but keep him clean. Majesty, the war between these forces is not fought in fields or on thrones. It is fought in the human heart, and whichever side we serve there, that side will rule the world outside. The king said nothing for a long while. Then, with a slow nod, he dismissed the court for the night, but from that evening on, he began asking Zoroaster to walk with him in the gardens, away from prying ears, to speak of the battles no army could see. And so, Zoroaster's work at court was not only to guide the king's decisions, but to turn his gaze inward, because Zoroaster understood something few dared to say aloud: nations do not fall because of enemies at their gates. They fall because their leaders have lost the battle within. The years passed, and the fire did not go out. Under the protection of King Vishtaspa, Zoroaster's teachings began to spread, carried by merchants across dusty roads, whispered by travelers at caravan fires, written into scrolls that found their way into distant lands. Villages that once bowed to 100 petty gods now gathered around a single flame, burning in honor of Ahura Mazda. The priests of the new faith spoke not of endless sacrifices, but of the simple, powerful law: good thoughts, good words, good deeds. Temples were built not to hold the divine, but to tend the eternal fire that symbolized it. The flames burned in silence, and yet they spoke, reminding all who entered that truth must be kept alive, just as the fire must be fed. Travelers told stories of these temples, of how a man can walk in burdened by guilt, stand before the flame in quiet reflection, and walk out lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. It was not magic, it was memory, the soul remembering what it had always known. And though Zoroaster was only one man, his fire lit many others. Long after his voice was gone, his words continued to move across mountains, deserts, and seas. Even as empires rose and fell, the fire endured. It burned when the Persians faced their enemies. It burned when new kings took the throne. It burned when invaders came, and even when conquerors sought to stamp out his teachings, the flame reappeared in hidden places, kept alive by those who would not forget. For Zoroaster had told them, "The fire you see before you is only the reflection of the fire within you. Guard it well, and no darkness will ever master you." And so, the flame became more than a symbol. It became a promise. A promise that even in a world of shadow and strife, there would always be those who chose to walk in the light. The man called Zoroaster is gone, but the fire still burns. Not only in the temples of far-off lands, not only in the stories of priests and scholars, but in every moment a human being chooses truth over the lie. You see, the two forces he spoke of are not locked away in some distant cosmic realm. They are here. Now. In you. Every thought you entertain feeds one force or the other. Every word you speak sends a ripple into the world. Every act you commit either builds the light, or strengthens the shadow. It is not kings or priests who decide the fate of the world. It is the sum of our choices, moment by moment, breath by breath. Zoroaster knew that no matter how many empires fell, no matter how many temples were destroyed, as long as even one person kept their inner flame alive, the truth could never be extinguished. And so I ask you, right now, in the quiet of your own mind, which force will you serve? Will you feed the flame with good thoughts, good words, good deeds? Or will you let the smoke of falsehood choke it until it fades into darkness? The fire is here. It is yours. It is waiting. And in its light, the path is clear. The rest is up to you.